Hey everybody, welcome to Northern Thailand. Today we're going to start looking at compost teas, specifically the ones that I'm using here on my property and the reasons for that. Now, did you know that there's more than one compost tea type that you can use in your garden? Well, if you already did, you're ahead of the game, but if you didn't, hopefully there's something fun for you to learn in all of this today. So let's get started and take a look at it together. Compost teas are a really fun, creative, and inexpensive way to get high quality nutrients and microbes into your soil. Now, regardless to whether you're a home gardener or somebody that has a full-scale farm, these techniques can provide you priceless information for saving hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on inputs and amendments for your property. So we're going to go over a couple of them today, specifically a couple different categories of them today that I use on my property. Basically, there's two different types of compost tea. There's what's known as anaerobic, which means no oxygen is used in the process of creating the nutrients and the microbes. And then there's aerobic, where oxygen is pumped into the tea to create oxygen-rich microbes and nutrients for your soil. Now, if you're only going to plan to use one or the other in these categories, this really doesn't matter. But if you do want to use both, as I'm going to demonstrate here on my property, it's important to know exactly where it is that you need to start. And because of that, the first place that we want to start is with the teas that get the microbes and the nutrients deepest down into the soil, and those are anaerobic teas. Now, in the anaerobic category of teas, there's two different types. The first type is what are considered to be nutrient teas. And the best in class amongst these comes from a natural farming practice out of Korea called Jadam. And that tea is known as Jadam liquid fertilizer, also referred to as JLF. Now, its general ingredients are pretty straightforward. It requires a 5-gallon bucket of really good, clean water, the grass and the weeds from the area that you're wanting to use, leaf mold in the soil that the leaf mold was sitting on top of, and a really nice quality sea salt. Now, this is something that you put into a bucket, you cover it with the lid, or you can leave it open if you have a place where you aren't getting too many pests, and you want that to simply process down for a no minimum of 21 days, and as long as you want. The longer it goes, the more powerful it becomes. So it's a really, really powerful liquid fertilizer that you can create. It's anaerobic in nature, and it's just a really beautiful process. There's a lot of other things that you can do with this though as well. There's something that's known as a targeted JLF, and what that essentially is taking the fruits and flowers along with the grass and weeds around a particular plant, tree, or crop and making a JLF from that. Using the same general ingredients, you put this all together and these nutrients become targeted for that particular crop or plant or tree. It's a really amazing way to be able to target specific nutrients to your crop or your tree. But there's a few other methods with this as well. One of which is known as a pest-based JLF, and this is amazing. Here in northern Thailand, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of acres of rice paddies, as you can probably imagine. Some of the problems that end up happening for the farmers, though, during any given season, is they usually end up having to replant the rice paddy fields because of pests like golden apple snails and freshwater clams that we actually have up here at 1,100 feet above sea level. Don't ask me how they got here, but they are here. They invade the rice paddies, they destroy the rice paddies. It is a huge problem for the farmers up here in this area. But what you can do, and this is a little bit of a different set of ingredients, but you can take this pest, be it the snails or the freshwater clams, you can combine them with brown sugar instead of salt, the fruit that they may have been attacking in that area, which in this case would be like the rice and the rice stalk and stuff, as well as a really fresh, clean set of water, and allow this to go for 21 days. And at the end, what you've done is you've not only reclaimed all the nutrients that they were robbing, such as, especially like zinc and other really good humic acids, but you're getting a whole new set of calcium brought in as well. It's an amazing, amazing, and very powerful liquid fertilizer when you use it this way. Now, I'm not going to list the ingredients out directly for pest-based JLF, but what I will do is I'm going to post something in the community tab for any of you who are interested in what those ingredients would be. They'll be made available to you so you can make this JLF yourself. And then lastly, and I would be really remiss if I didn't include this, but JLF actually includes a process with the general ingredients to be able to process through human waste. Now, I realize that this is a really taboo subject back in the West, and my channel is not political, but I do want to say this. With all that's going on in the world right now, especially with the farmers over in Holland And with everything becoming so regulated to the absolute ounce of liquid nitrogen fertilizer that's being used, these types of methods are going to become extremely, extremely important. One of the things that is being touted right now is the fact that organic methods are failing all over the world, from the Dutch farmers in Holland to the nation of Sri Lanka and what's happened there. It's giving a bad name to organics, and the reason is because of government bureaucracy. That is not what this is about. This is about utilizing the things that are in creation to be able to provide for yourself without having to spend a ton of money to do it otherwise. So that's my soapbox rant, and please forgive me, but it's just something that really needs to be said, because there's just too much that's going on and too much that's being restricted to people today that it's just not fair to the everyday gardener and farmer. Anyway, that is JLF. You use it at a dilution rate of 1 to 500. And now that we've taken a look at that, it's time to take a look at something else truly amazing. And that is the second tea in this category of nutrient teas, known as David's Fetid Swamp Water. Now I'm going to tell you something. If JLF is first in class amongst these teas, David's tea is the cornucopia of the kitchen sink. I mean, this has been something that he's been making now for probably about 10 years. And I mean, he literally throws everything into this tea. I'm talking everything from kitchen scraps to leftovers in his refrigerator, fish emulsion, cow patties, Epsom salt. He's even used his own human urine in this tea before. So this is something we're going to take a really quick look at. Now, when it comes to anaerobic nutrients, something like David the Good Juice, which David has since coined the phrase Dave's Fetid Swamp Water, this is an anaerobic nutrient, a broad spectrum anaerobic nutrient that you can use first to get into your soil and have them in place and ready to go, so that when we start to add the microbes, the anaerobic microbes later, we have the nutrients in place to be consumed by the microbes. Now, what's really interesting about these two barrels, I had 3 of these. I started these back in April, May, and June of 2019. They've been sitting and they have not seen the light of day since then. I used one of them on my old property after about 6 months of it fermenting, but these two, they've been going that whole time. Now, I'm not going to be using them because I already have heavy clay soil. So all the nutrients that the microbes need, they're already in place. But if I was wanting to use these anaerobic nutrients on my property, what I would do, and if you have sandy soil or something less than heavy clay soil, what you could do is get yourself a measuring cup like this. This is a 1/3 cup. Put it into something like a cheesecloth. This way you could dip it in and not get as much debris and just get the straight juice. And I would take 1 from each one of these barrels, mix it into a 5-gallon bucket of water, and then we would be ready to go to add into our area. And you would just pour it directly in. No brewing, no waiting, just scoop, put in, mix. Maybe if you wanted to, you could also stack some additional nutrients in there with it, like a vinegar-based nutrient from Korean Natural Farming, such as WCA or WCAP. That's a calcium nutrient. That way you've got all the nutrients in place that you want before you add your microbes, and then you're ready to go forward from there. Now, I know that may seem like a lot of time spent on teas that I'm not even using my property, but these are really important considerations for you to take when you're putting together a compost tea regime like this. What is your soil type and what are its needs? If you have heavy clay soil such as I do you really need nutrients in there when you're already loaded with nutrients that are just inert? No, you really don't. All that being said, I definitely am going to make targeted JLF later on once my trees, hopefully next spring, start to flower and fruit. And once that happens, I will definitely be showing you more video footage of that at that point in time. But basically, those are the 2 most critical types of nutrient teas for you to consider when putting together a compost tea regime. And with that being said, the next type in the anaerobic category is something that I'm going to be using and demonstrating and showing you today, and that is anaerobic microbe teas. And of these teas, the absolute Cadillac of them is another tea from Jadam, known as Jadam Microorganism Solution, also known as JMS. Now, one thing you're going to notice that both JLF and JMS have in common is the need for really good fungal soil and leaf mold. Well, where do you find all this at? Come take a walk with me and I'll show you. Now, you would think with all this beautiful, lush vegetation around here and these huge trees that I should have no problem finding microbes, but one of the issues, and it really stinks, is that none of these areas are very undisturbed. They're disturbed all the time by everything from livestock to just people. When I go microbe hunting, I look for two things. One is something that's at or around the same elevation as me, and right now I'm sitting on an elevation that's well over 1,100 feet above sea level. But the other thing you want, if you can find mushrooms in the soil where you're digging, that's an even bigger plus. This teakwood tree here is huge. So let's see what's going on underneath it. Alright, so this is just the base of the tree, and unfortunately it rained, it looks like, in the middle of the night. It had been dry the past couple days, which is why I wanted to start doing this morning. But let's take a look and see if we can find something. Right here at the base of the tree, see this leaf area? See these leaves? This is both the soil I want and the leaf mold that I want. I'm gonna bag it up. That right there is gorgeous stuff. That's what I want my my JMS. So after my microbe hunt, I noticed that on my property some carpenter ants had kicked up their anthill. So I grabbed a scoop of that, threw it in with the bag of the other stuff that I'd collected, and I have a really nice collection now of both leaf mold and some really good fungal soil to start my JMS with. So let's take a look at the other things that we're going to need for our JMS. You're going to want a 5-gallon bucket of good clean water, sea salt, a potato or a sweet potato that's been boiled, and our previously collected leaf mold and the soil that it was sitting on top of. Now you're also going to want to have a couple bags, one that's more fine mesh than the other, and a yardstick to go ahead and suspend them from. And then we're going to start taking a look at the water, because I know I've said it multiple times now, good clean water. I'm talking about either rainwater, well water if you have a well on your property, or if you don't have either one of those, go with a really good neutral RO water, something that's a 7.0 pH, and don't worry about the nutrients, because the very first thing we're going to get started with is salt, and that's going to provide them right out the gate. Now, what I do like to do the day before I start a batch of JMS is I get the salt going. So there's one of two options that you can go with. Normally sea salt is what is recommended, and this is traditional. It's been used from the very beginning in Jadam. There's nothing wrong with it, but the reason I'm bringing it up the way that I am is because ever since the Fukushima disaster back in 2011, I've always been a little skeptical about sea salt. So I contacted the people at Jadam regarding pink Himalayan salt, and they said that's perfectly fine as well. So for this batch, I'm going to be using this. Now, one thing I want to make sure that I'm perfectly clear on for you is that you do not have to do the salt the day before. I'm doing this because it is all about timing when it comes to JMS with regards to your weather, the temperature. All these things have an effect on the microbes that you're gathering and creating. So I have rain that's getting ready to come into the area in about 3 days time. So I'm starting the salt the day before because I want to make sure that I time this right and that it doesn't peak too early. I've done JMS here in Thailand in the past, and I actually had a batch that was done in 24 hours. But now it was a lot hotter than it is right now, yet it's close enough that it leaves me skeptical to whether or not it may happen again. So I'm trying to time this right. I've got 3 days to work with, and that's about the amount of time that you want to have your JMS run for. You want to, go ahead and plan for about 3 days, and then with the rain coming in, that's perfect, because as Yongsang Cho from Jadam will tell you, the best time to apply all of these anaerobic teas, whether it's nutrient tea or microbe tea, is right before heavy rain. So now that we have our salt dissolved in our bucket of water, it's time to start to assemble our ingredients. And unfortunately, I don't have white or yellow potatoes available to me very easily here in my area, so you just go with what it is you have, and I'm going to use a yellow sweet potato. It doesn't have nearly as much starch, but it will work. So you go ahead and you get your finer mesh bag, the one that doesn't have the larger size holes, and we're going to put our sweet potato in there. Now, ideally, if you have twist ties or zip ties, those work best in this situation, but if you don't, just get a couple of rubber bands and you'll make a simple cinch knot around the neck of the bag that you want to measure just to make sure that it's a couple inches off the bottom of the bucket. We don't want the bag containing the sweet potato or our leaf mold and soil touching the bottom of the bucket. And the reason is because JMS actually creates a current in the water on the water columns on the opposite ends of the bag. It's really, really awesome. It's completely driven by the microbes, the way that they respond to both the starch, the water, and the salt all coming together. And it's almost like its own air pump. It's obviously not an air pump, but it's a very slow moving current that happens on the water columns on the outside of the bucket, which is why you're able to tell when your JMS is ready. A lot of times people say you want a tight grouping of bubbles at the very top of the water of your bucket that have started to separate from the side of it. That's when you know your JMS is at its optimum level of microbial activity, and it's true. But right now we just want to get these things put in. So we start to massage the potato until it becomes a mash, and then we're going to end up doing that very same thing with the leaf mold and soil in our other bag that has the large size holes. We get those put together, we put them inside of our brew, and I'm covering things up here not because you have to, but I do so because I have a lot of animals in the area, especially street dogs that will otherwise come and disturb the tea. And the last thing I want is for them to drink it all for themselves. So that's why I cover things up the way that I do. So after 24 hours, even though it had not finished completely as it had in the past on other batches that I had during really hot times during the year, I could tell that I had a really good batch going on here. When you see baby geckos showing up on your board and the type of bubbling activity that I have going on in my brew, it's a good batch that's going on. This is probably somewhere between 30 to 50% complete, but there's one other problem, and that problem is that my forecast has now changed. Remember how I said rain is the perfect thing to have happen right when you're getting ready to apply your JMS? Well, unfortunately, it is the worst thing that can happen when your JMS is not done, because especially here in Thailand, as soon as it starts to rain, we get about a 10-degree drop in temperature, and that is enough to knock all the microbes out of whack in your JMS. So now I'm in a use it or lose it situation. So as such, it was just time to put it in place. Now I have 5 different spots that I have trees that have been planted for over a year that I'm wanting to treat. And just as I was finished treating the last spot, about 5 minutes after, it started to rain. And it didn't stop for 3 days, which was perfect if I only would have started the JMS about 24 hours earlier. So gang, that is the anaerobic tea section. Now, regardless to whether you want to just use one or both of these teas, please know this. You want to go ahead and use the nutrient tea first to get the nutrients in the ground, if in fact you have a need for that with your soil, and then apply the microbes on top of that thereafter. Ideally right before a heavy rain, but if not, just make sure you've got a good quality of water to use to really drench the area after you apply them. That gets both your nutrients in place, your microbes in place, deep in the soil, which is the prescription from Jadam for utilizing these teas properly. And just as a quick aside, remember that the JLF you want to use at a dilution ratio of 1 to 500. Your JMS, it really just depends. As you saw with mine, it wasn't complete, so I just went ahead and I applied it full strength. But that also is something that you can go ahead and apply between 1 to 500 to 1 to 100. It just depends on how strong it is, and it really depends on what it is you're doing with it. If you're preparing soil that doesn't have anything planted in it yet, go full strength. If you have tender plants like annuals that are really sensitive to any type of changes, go really weak with the tea. It's just something you're going to have to get a feel for and gauge over time to see how things respond in your area. That's the way to do it. And that's it. So after the 3 days of rain, I got 3 days of absolutely gorgeous, sunny, but very hot weather, and I knew it was time to get started on the aerobic tea. Aerobic teas, the oxygen-rich stuff. Now, this is what I was saying back at the beginning of the video. This is where the creative fun side of things really comes into play. I mean, this is the tea that everybody knows, right? Everybody has seen this before. Bucket of water, yardstick hanging over it with a bag of something inside of there and a whole bunch of sugary stuff in the water and bubbles everywhere. Looks like a big bubble bath. I mean, I remember the first time I started making these teas, I was putting everything in there from worm castings to EM1 to molasses to fish emulsion. It was just it was a goulash of stuff that I wanted to try out, and it was a lot of fun. But there is a very specific structure to it to make sure that it works consistently the right way each time, and that's what we're going to take a look at now. Just as with the other teas, there's going to be some things that you'll need, and it's a little bit more involved, but not a whole lot. So let's take a look at it. First of all, a 5-gallon bucket of some really good clean water, a cheesecloth sack to put your castings in, an aquarium air pump and its hose, something that does right about 20 gallons an hour is right. A really good diffusing air stone is what I highly recommend as opposed to a whole bunch of little ones. Unsulfured molasses, this is the sugar source that you really want to use on a regular basis. However, I don't have any, so we're going to have a little bit of a test going on today. And then lastly, your finished compost. Now, in my case, we're going to be using worm castings, but you could use regular compost if that's what you have. It doesn't matter. Both will provide an ample amount of really good microbes for your topsoil, but worm castings is probably one of the best that you can ever use. Now, technically, all of these teas here that I've been talking about today have both nutrients and microbes in them. It's just that certain ones are more focused on specifically either nutrients or microbes. In the case of your aerobic teas, specifically vermicompost tea, you're going to have this happen all in one brew. That's one of the nice things about it. Plus, in addition to this, you don't have to go nearly as long. Most of your brew times you can time for about 24 hours. However, on this one, I am going to plan for a 36-hour brew cycle, and I'll explain a little bit later on in the video why that is. But basically, what we need to do now is get our air pump set up. Now, as I was saying in the past, you don't need to have a whole bunch of air stones in your tea. Just one really good diffusing stone is all you need. Now, this one is going to be a little light, so I'm going to have to weight it down with some really smooth stones, but it's precisely what you want so that you can tell when your tea is truly at its microbial peak. Now, as I also said when I was telling you the things that you'll need, I don't have unsulfured molasses for this brew this time. So we're going to be running a bit of a test here, and I'm going to go into it for you right now. Now, earlier when I was telling you about the different items that you're going to need for making this tea, I did tell you that this actually is not unsulfured molasses, but what this is a sugar sourced based input from Korean natural farming called fermented plant juice, FPJ. And if my theory holds correct on this, this is going to provide not only the sugar source that's going to be necessary for our worm castings, but it's also going to be bringing a whole different set of microbes to the table. I potentially may wind up with 2 aerobic compost teas in one batch. So we're going to try this right now and see how it looks. Now, this FPJ is old. I made this about 3 years ago from the young shoots of turmeric leaves, but I'll tell you what, after 2 hours, those bubbles, those are gas bubbles. Those aren't from the air stone. So I let this thing go for a full 8 hours because I wanted to see what it would look like during like a typical night's rest. And I had to add to it about 2 times in that time period. But as you can see at the top of the water, the activity from the FPJ has definitely declined after 8 hours. So I know this is something I'm going to have to manage very carefully. Now, this has been going for just a little over 10 hours. I've provided 2 separate doses of the FPJ to this in that 10-hour period. And you can see there's definitely some activity in it, which will probably become even more pronounced as time goes. But now it is time to add the worm castings. And additionally, the bag that I'm putting my castings in is the exact same bag that I used to make the JMS that had the sweet potato in it. Now, the reason I'm doing that is, again, because I'm lacking in starch and sugars. By going with this experiment that I'm using, this may be able to provide some additional sugars and foods for the microbes to feast off of. And then we're going to probably harvest this right around the 36-hour period once it's done brewing. Now, whether the remnant from the sweet potato is going to render down in enough time over these next 30 or so hours to be useful to the microbes in this brew, I really have no idea. But you know what? It's okay. This is a test. It's an experiment. I've never tried this before, and we're just trying to see what's possible. So I really don't have any expectations here. I'm just trying to see what can be used in place of something usually required to make this work successfully. And if it turns out that it works, great. And if it doesn't, you know what? I'm still going to have something at the end of this to be able to utilize and put in place for my soil. May not be optimal, but it'll definitely be something. So we'll have to see what that looks like at the end. And things were looking really promising. As time was moving forward, I had a lot of great activity that was showing up, but as you can start to see this foam showing around the sides of the bucket, that's how you know when things are beginning to die off. And one of the other things, unfortunately, I ran out of FPJ. And I mean, I was really just literally getting down to the last drips of it and decided to just put a scoop of the brown sugar that was used to stabilize it initially years ago. But I know that this probably isn't going to last. And unfortunately, the very next morning, right at about the 32-hour mark, that's what it looked like. But you know what? Take a look at this. That's still a lot of different gas bubbles that are coming up from the microbes. So there still is activity in here. Is it optimal? No, probably not. but it's still usable, and that's what we're going to do now. But one thing you definitely want to keep in mind is that the longer the tea brews for, the higher the viscosity of your actual brew. And by that I mean it goes from being a smooth liquid to more like a kind of a watery syrup. It's definitely a lot more difficult to get put through a sprayer if you really like to use this as a foliar feed. Now, I was cutting it at about half of my spray bottle with the compost tea to half water, and I figured that would be a good place to start, but my goodness, I was barely able to even get it to mist. In fact, it didn't mist at all. It was spraying out more like just like a water hose. But that still, it worked fine. I did the foliage. I wetted the ground down so that it was, ready to receive some stuff. And then I sprayed the top of the ground. I even did a little bit of a soil drench with it, which is the perfect way to use a vermicompost tea like this as both a foliar feed and a soil drench. So that is it. That is my compost tea regime. Now, this is optional. There is one other part to this that if you want to use, I definitely would encourage and recommend that you do. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. But I do, and the reason I do is because I really try to put natural farming practices in place whenever I can. And that is with a pre and post treatment solution. The first of these is probably my favorite natural farming input of all, LAB, lactic acid bacteria. This was my go-to pre and post treatment solution before I discovered chitosan. And it's really straightforward, it's very simple. I'm not going to demonstrate how to make it in this video, but I'll leave some links in the description box below. A lot of different resources are going to be there for this video, you guys, and you'll be able to see how to make it for yourselves in there. But basically what you want is a ratio of 1 to 100 in a spray bottle, and then just spray your foliage with it, wet the ground down, spray the top of it. I don't use it as a soil drench, but you definitely can. And what this does is it gets the police force of the bacteria world into the foliage and on topsoil of your ground, of your soil. So this is a really good way to get the ground ready to receive new teas. And now lastly, chitosan. And I'm going to tell you something. If you didn't see my last video, you didn't see how silly I got over this. This is an amazing amendment. It is not a bacteria. It is not a fungi. It is a biopolymer. It is a liquid biological plastic. And this thing has so many amazing benefits in your soil, on the foliage of your plants and trees. It's just, it would probably take me somewhere around 4 to 5 natural farming inputs combined from Korean natural farming, Jadam, and maybe even Kunsai natural farming out of Japan to come up with the same things that this one amendment does all by itself. It's just outstanding in its benefits. Now, in applying the chitosan at the post phase, you don't need to go as strong as you did in the pre-phase. For instance, I went with a 1 to 10 solution at the very beginning, back at the end of June when I first started the whole routine. This time around, I'm going very, very weak. Like maybe 1 to 500 to possibly somewhere between that and 1 to 1,000. I'm using what you see me measure out here in the small cup in 4.5 pints of really just good clean water. And the reason, there's not a lot that's needed at this point. It really doesn't need a whole lot. And that's the same for the ground. For the soil drench, I kept it the same. I went with about a 1 to 250 mixture. Less is more with chitosan. I don't know how to explain it. It is such an amazing amendment that it just does not take a lot of it to be effective. So that's it. That is the regime. Now, here's the routine. This is how it played out and how I applied it to my property. On Thursday, June 30th, for the first time on my property, I applied chitosan. I went with a 1 to 10 foliar feed and a 1 to 250 soil drench for my soil. That touted this particular product of chitosan that I have here in Thailand, an approximate 21 to 30 day strength once you apply it that way. Now, that probably varies depending on if you've made your own chitosan or if you're using a different product, but that's what it said, so that's what I went with. So exactly 3 weeks to the day after I applied the chitosan, I began the JMS. That was where you saw me start with the salt, and then 24 hours later, I actually started the rest of the ingredients, and unfortunately, I ran out of time. The rain started. There was somewhere between a 10 to 15 degree drop in temperature, and so I had to pull it. I had to use it or I was going to lose it. It rained for the next 3 days. So from 23, 24, and 25, I had rain. Then on 26, 27, and 28, I had sun. And on day 28, that's when I finally decided to start the compost tea, the vermicompost tea. And in doing so, I applied it right on the 30th of July. And then the very next day I went with LAB, and then right after that, the final application of chitosan. Now, what are some of the lessons that can be learned from this? Well, for starters, I definitely should have started the JMS a little bit earlier. And in the future, if I do this again in the middle of the year like this, I will definitely do that. Now, my intention and my purpose is to use this routine about 3 times a year. Once at the beginning of spring in March, again in the summer like I did here, and then one final application in either September or maybe possibly early October. And then from there, we're just going to have to see how it responds. But I mean, I'm offering this video to you guys literally at the end of August. I'm getting ready to turn around and do it one more time. So the other lesson learned on this with the vermicompost tea was that I can definitely get away with using something other than unsulfured molasses. But as opposed to a 36-hour runtime for the brew, I'll definitely cut it back to 24. And when I go to use it as a foliar feed, I'm going to definitely cut it as opposed to half of the bottle down to maybe a quarter or less. You'll be able to apply more of it around your property that way. And it's just an awesome opportunity to use a completely different sugar source to possibly come up with even better microbes in the end. And gang, that's what it's all about. I mean, when you take a look at my property, if you've been spending any time on my channel, if you've ever seen my very first video that I put up here in May of 2021, you saw what these trees looked like when I first put them in the ground. And where they are today, the only thing I can say is that it really is all about the microbes. And that's it. I really hope you enjoyed the video. I know it was a long one. If you stuck with me through it, I really appreciate it. Please like and share it with somebody. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet, and hit the bell notification icon if you would, so that you can be alerted when I upload new content. Listen, wherever you are in this world today or tonight, you take care. Bye for now. He likes the JMS. I just applied some JMS over here. He smells it.